This was my favorite as a kid. Thank you. This is exactly what I needed.
Welcome to the debate. Today we're looking at the tension at the heart of certain mass social movements, specifically the Buy Nothing movement, which was really inspired by the book Buy Nothing, Get Everything. The core idea is about creating these hyper-local gift economies where sharing and repairing things replaces buying them. It's a profound challenge to consumer culture.
It is. And the complexity here, the thing that makes this such a great topic for debate, is this fundamental contradiction. You have a philosophy that is all about intentionality, personal choice, avoiding rigid rules, and yet the entire project is launched under this incredibly provocative absolute command: buy nothing, get everything.
Exactly. And that brings us to our central question. For a movement like this to succeed, does its integrity depend more on that attention-grabbing, challenging language? Or does it depend on a strict intellectual adherence to, well, to personalized, non-prescriptive thinking?
I'm going to argue that the paradox and the provocation are absolutely essential tools. They're a necessary friction point for both philosophical inquiry and for mass appeal.
And I'll be coming at it from a different angle. I'm going to argue that any movement, no matter how good it is at making noise initially, undermines its own core principles the moment it introduces a prescriptive command. If the goal is internal freedom, then external rules, even rhetorical ones, they're corrosive to that whole objective. I think the power of buy nothing, get everything really comes from its function as a kind of behavioral shock. We live in a culture where the default is always to buy. The material even notes, if you're too nuanced, you lose people. So to create a real groundswell, a global network of these gift economies, you just can't rely on subtle suggestions. You need a headline. You need a manifesto, a paradox that just cuts through the noise.
Mm-hmm.
And this phrase, it forces an immediate redefinition of wealth, which is the movement's actual mission. Get everything is not about stuff, right? It's about gaining community, gaining time, freedom from debt, mental clarity. So the literal challenge, that sharp command to just stop buying, it acts as the initial jolt that's needed to start the deeper philosophical work, to really examine our habits and fears around ownership. Without that jolt, I think the movement just stays on the fringe.
I see why you prioritize that jolt. I really do. But let me offer a different perspective that's rooted in the ultimate goal of the movement. Minimalism as a philosophy, it isn't an ideology you just follow. It's a practice, a continuous practice of intentionality. And the only question that matters is, does this add value to my life? Any prescriptive rule, even a catchy one, fundamentally stops you from asking that question honestly.
But does it stop you, or does it force you to ask it for the first time?
Well, I think it stops you because the material explicitly warns against binary thinking. You know, this idea that you either buy nothing or buy everything. The second you set up a rule like buy nothing, you shift the focus from your own internal discernment to just external compliance. What's wasteful for one person might be a deliberate, useful tool for another. So the moment you forbid something, the entire concept of personal discernment is just lost. The real lasting value here isn't understanding the why. It's about mastering the internal desire, not just following a rigid instruction from a punchy title.
Okay, but let's focus on the outcomes, on what's necessary for scaling. How do you effectively foster these gift economies and the community interaction, which is the measurable success of the Buy Nothing project, without a strong, unifying, easily digestible call to action? The figurative understanding you're talking about, the clarity and community, it can't exist without that initial, literal challenge to our habits. The phrase isn't just an attention grabber. It's a low-friction entry point for what is, let's be honest, a very complex behavioral change.
But isn't that a bit of a circular argument? You're saying we need the provocation to create the community, but the community is the only thing that justifies the provocation. I see it differently. When a movement leans so heavily on an absolute phrase, it encourages people to focus on superficial renunciation, just, refusing one purchase. And that's the easy part. It doesn't generate deep philosophical change. That real shift comes from understanding that renunciation isn't about deprivation. It's about gaining mastery over desire. That's a deeply Stoic lesson, and it's about controlling the impulse, not just the action. Oversimplifying the message for mass appeal risks compromising the integrity of that inquiry.
That line of reasoning worries me a bit because it sounds like it prioritizes a kind of intellectual purity over practical necessity. I mean, yes, the ultimate goal is internal mastery, but the challenge for any mass movement is overcoming this huge societal inertia that's constantly pushing people to consume. If we have to be hyper-nuanced from the get-go, demanding philosophical enlightenment before someone can even participate, we'll never create the critical mass needed to show people the benefits of that mastery, the get-everything part. It's about building momentum.
But what's the consequence if you gain that momentum through superficiality? You end up with high attrition. People realize that true intentionality is hard work, while just following a buy-nothing rule feels restrictive and, frankly, impractical. So they leave, because they never achieved that necessary internal alignment to begin with.
Right.
And this goes directly to the distinction between abundance and excess. Intentionality is what determines value, not the number of things you own. The material itself gives us a perfect counterexample to your argument. It talks about the late ant whose collected materials looked like clutter, but were actually described as tools of creation and giving, because she used them with intention, with generosity. That proves possession itself isn't the problem. It's the lack of deliberate choice. So a movement shouldn't risk alienating people like her just because its rhetoric is designed as an absolute ban for the masses.
I appreciate that point, and it's a good one, but I would argue that case of the ant is an intentional exception, not the systemic rule we should be designing for. For the average consumer who is operating under a societal default of constant acquisition, we need the bluntness of buy nothing, precisely to shift that systemic default. The movement's goal is reducing overconsumption on a mass scale, and for that you need extreme language to change the default habit from buying to sharing to repair to community lending. It's about creating a protective buffer against that compulsion to own. The action has to precede the philosophical conviction.
I'm just not convinced by that because you seem to be arguing for dogma for the masses while sacrificing intellectual clarity for the individual. The core of minimalism is freedom. Freedom from being enslaved by what you have. If the movement uses absolute commands, even as rhetorical devices, it risks replacing enslavement to consumption with a new enslavement, to anti-consumption rules. And that is fundamentally counterproductive to the goal of personal discernment. The focus just shifts to following the rule, not examining the desire that led to the consumption in the first place.
But have you considered the psychological necessity of that radical break? Sometimes the first step toward genuine discernment requires a forceful shove, the kind only provocative language can provide. Think about the internal friction before we act generously. The material mentions Joshua never regretting being generous, only hesitating before doing it. That strong rhetoric acts as the necessary push to overcome that deep-seated fear, that hesitation that attaches us to accumulation. It gets people over the hurdle, and then the community benefits can take root and reinforce the change.
You're describing a behavioral push, and I acknowledge that's powerful, but it isn't philosophical enlightenment. A rule only addresses the external action, the purchase. It does nothing to address the internal desire that drove it. If I stop buying because a rule tells me to, I haven't mastered my desire. I've just followed an order. True discernment means being pulled by an internal conviction, understanding why I want something, not just being pushed away from it by a public slogan.
That's a powerful distinction, I'll grant you, but I still maintain that the action creates the environment for the conviction to grow. When people are jolted into the community structure that the Buy Nothing Project builds, they experience the tangible benefits of sharing. They see, oh, I don't need to own a leaf blower if 3 neighbors have one. That practical experience of abundance without ownership provides the real-world evidence that drives the sustainable philosophical shift far more effectively than any solitary meditation on intentionality ever could.
The danger, though, is that the movement becomes synonymous with a restriction, not a liberation. If the public perception is that group that forbids buying things instead of a group focused on joyful, intentional living, you attract people focused on simple renunciation, not deep engagement. The headline compromises the long-term intellectual resilience needed for real generational change.
So, to wrap up my side, I believe the power of a movement like Buy Nothing comes from its willingness to be provocative. By using a paradox, it forces a necessary, immediate redefinition of wealth. That shock factor is what successfully turns an idea from a marginal intellectual curiosity into a global, action-oriented movement. The literal shock of Buy Nothing is, I think, the necessary price of entry to get to the figurative reward of get everything.
Intellectual clarity is paramount for any lasting substantive change. The enduring philosophical benefit of this movement rests not in the absolute phrase, but in its ability to serve as an exercise in inquiry, ensuring that individuals approach life with personal discernment. We have to avoid binary thinking and move toward that mastery over desire that defines a genuinely minimalist and even stoic life. If the rhetoric obscures that vital principle of intentionality, the whole thing risks becoming just another temporary rulebook.
Ultimately, both the force of attention-grabbing communication for systemic change and the clarity of that individualized intentionality are, well, they're critical elements when exploring the relationship between renunciation, abundance, and accumulation.
Indeed. And there remains a lot more to explore in how these different approaches help us avoid that fate of being enslaved by what one has.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are tackling a magnificent contradiction, a title that is pure paradox.
It really is.
Buy nothing, get everything.
Right.
It has the punch of a great marketing slogan for sure, but when you really look at it closely, it reveals itself to be a deeply philosophical challenge to how we all live.
It's such a compelling entry point, isn't it?
It is.
That title alone forces you to just stop and question the entire premise of wealth, of scarcity, of what it means to have something.
So today we're diving into the core philosophy of what's known as the Buy Nothing movement.
And we're exploring the thinking behind this movement, which, has scaled from just two neighbors into a truly global phenomenon.
That's amazing.
It really is. Our discussion is primarily inspired by the work of Liesl Clark and Rebecca Rockefeller, who laid out all these principles in their book, which has that same title, Buy Nothing, Get Everything.
Absolutely. And what really struck me as we were preparing for this is that the source material isn't just about thriftiness. It's not even just about sustainability, though that's a huge part of it.
Right.
It's more like an instruction set for a kind of mental remodeling.
That's a great way to put it.
It's an intellectual challenge to the very engine of consumer culture, the one that's always telling us that we are only ever one purchase away from happiness.
One click away.
Right, one click away. And so our mission in this deep dive is to look beyond that literal, maybe impossible interpretation of buy nothing and really define the movement's profound goal.
Fundamentally, it encourages localized communities to shift away from this model of perpetual consumption and acquisition. I mean, that's the core idea.
So what are the behaviors? What does that look like in practice?
The core behaviors are actually really simple, but they feel radical in today's world.
Okay.
It's things like exchange, repair, and sharing items freely.
Freely, that's the key word.
That's the key. This model is an active grassroots resistance to the relentless and often hidden pressure of overconsumption that governs so much of modern life.
And that framework, that idea of sharing freely, is where the getting everything part of the title starts to really resonate.
Exactly.
Because it connects directly into the principles of what we could call intentional minimalism.
And we should be really clear about what we mean by minimalism here.
Yeah, good point. We're not talking about some aesthetic decision to own only black and white objects or have one single perfect chair in an empty room.
No, not at all.
We are talking about the deliberate, ongoing practice of actively questioning the necessity and the value of each and every possession you allow to enter, or, just as importantly, remain in your life.
That intentionality is the crucial starting point for you, the listener.
Right.
If you leave this deep dive understanding just one thing, it should be that the movement is not about punitive restriction. It's not about making yourself miserable.
It's not a punishment.
No. The goal is to move beyond simple, surface-level rules. The kind of lists you see online, like don't buy disposable plates.
Right. The checklists.
Yes, to truly understand the intentionality behind your choices. Why is this choice being made? Does it serve a greater, clearly defined purpose in your life?
So it's about the why.
It's all about the why. If you understand the why, then the act of buying nothing transforms from a restrictive chore into a powerful philosophical tool, a tool that actually grants you freedom from the compulsion to consume.
Okay, so let's unpack that compulsion. Let's talk about restraint as we move into the philosophy behind the movement. Because the first conceptual trap, the one our sources flag immediately, is what you just called binary thinking.
It's an almost inevitable reaction,
Also.
The moment someone hears the phrase buy nothing, their brain just immediately leaps to the opposite extreme.
If I can't buy nothing, I must buy everything.
Exactly that. The human mind loves these tidy boxes, these simple dichotomies, and consumption is such a massive and, let's be honest, necessary part of modern existence.
You have to buy food.
You have to buy food, pay rent, acquire necessary services, that a literal interpretation of buy nothing immediately sets the listener up for failure. It makes it feel impossible from the start.
And to insist on that literal interpretation is to immediately incur guilt.
Oh, absolutely.
You bought milk for your kids, well, you failed. You had to replace a broken headlight on your car to get to work, failed again.
Right, and that guilt is counterproductive.
It makes the whole movement feel like this inaccessible utopian exercise, something that's only available to people who choose to live completely off-grid and, I don't know, make their own soap from ashes.
Which is precisely why the sources stress over and over that the phrase buy nothing must be understood figuratively. It's not a law.
It's a signpost.
It functions as a powerful directional arrow. It's a provocation, but it's not a universal literal law. It's not a command to reject ownership entirely.
So it's an invitation.
It's an invitation to treat acquisition as the absolute last resort, a conscious exception rather than the automatic, unthinking default.
I really like that framing. The conscious exception. That really shifts the focus, doesn't it?
It does.
It becomes an invitation to rethink how we acquire things, how we value the things we already possess, and maybe most importantly, how we can best share what we own.
And this naturally leads us away from the traditional isolating consumption model and into something that's much more communal.
The gift economy.
And this leads us to the practical infrastructure of the movement, the gift economy. And to really understand its significance, I think we have to look back at the actual genesis of the Buy Nothing project.
Okay, where did it start?
Well, it wasn't founded by political activists or some group of economic theorists in a university. It was founded by two people, Clark and Rockefeller, who saw a profound physical consequence of our rapid consumption.
Right, this is where the practical stakes of this philosophy come into really clear focus. They weren't just thinking about this in the abstract.
Not at all. They were motivated after they discovered the shocking, just overwhelming amount of plastic waste polluting their beaches. That ecological urgency was the initial immediate spark. It wasn't about self-improvement or, tidying up. It was about stopping the very real, tangible, physical damage being done to their environment by disposable culture.
So it started from a place of real crisis.
That tangible crisis, literally seeing the material cost of convenience washed up on the shore, that led them to start their first Buy Nothing project on Facebook in their own neighborhood.
On Facebook, so it started small.
Very small. And that scalability is what's so beautiful about it. It shows how a local, intentional action driven by clear ecological awareness can become a blueprint for global change.
It's a powerful demonstration that you don't need national policy to start rethinking your relationship with stuff.
Exactly. You just need a platform and a little bit of trust with your neighbors.
And I think this movement became global because it addressed that deep, often unconscious anxiety that so many of us have about waste and disconnection.
I agree. Its core function is promoting these gift economies. And, we use the word economy constantly, but we almost always define it by currency, by debt, and by exchange value.
Right, by what something costs.
A gift economy operates entirely differently. It is based purely on the expectation of generalized generosity, trust, and reciprocity, not on transactional equivalence.
Okay, so that's a critical distinction. It goes beyond just simple bartering or lending.
Way beyond.
So how is it different from bartering? If I barter, I give you an hour of my time doing yard work in exchange for borrowing your drill press for an hour.
Right.
It's an agreed upon immediate transaction of what we perceive as equal value.
Exactly. Bartering is still commerce. It's just non-monetary commerce.
Okay.
In a pure gift economy, I give you the item, let's say a winter coat my child has outgrown, simply because you need it. I do not expect you to give me anything specific in return. Not now, not in the future. The transaction is complete upon the giving.
But there's a social contract.
There is. The social contract requires that you, the recipient, acknowledge that you now owe something to the community. Not to me specifically, but to the group as a whole.
Ah, so you owe the community your future generosity whenever and however you're able to provide it.
Precisely.
So maybe a few weeks later, you see someone else needs a specific type of, I don't know, specialized cookie cutters for a bake sale, and you happen to have them collecting dust.
Right.
You give them away freely, and by doing that, you're maintaining the flow of generosity in the whole system.
That's it. It's a mechanism built on trust that the community as a whole will continue to provide for its members.
Okay.
The emphasis is on utility and mutual care, not on ownership and consumption.
So neighbors are encouraged to lend, trade, and simply give things away, consciously bypassing the traditional consumer cycle.
And the examples are so practical. Imagine you're doing a smuck repair in your bathroom and you need a small piece of drywall.
Right, you have to go to the hardware store and buy a giant 4 by 8 foot sheet.
A huge sheet you'll never use entirely, and then it sits in your garage for a decade.
Been there.
Instead, you post in the Buy Nothing group, "Hey, does anyone have a scrap piece of drywall?" And someone who just finished a project gives you their leftover piece. They don't want it back, and they certainly don't want money for it.
That pivot fundamentally changes your relationship with your neighborhood. It goes from being just a collection of houses with isolated consumers inside to a functional, interconnected support system. It changes the core question from what do I need to buy to solve this problem to who in my immediate vicinity already has what I need and how can I connect with them?
And crucially, the system has a built-in mechanism against the burden of ownership. This is really important.
What do you mean by that?
Well, when the coat you gave is outgrown by the next child, that family is now free to pass it on again. They don't have to worry about storing it or selling it or deciding who gets to keep the asset.
The object is just in perpetual motion.
Perpetual motion and utility. That constant movement challenges the very definition of what it means to own something valuable. Is the value in possessing it or in it being used?
That concept of utility leads us perfectly into our next section, which is section 2, minimalism as deliberate choice and intentionality.
Yes.
Because the success of participating in a gift economy or even just the buy nothing philosophy really hinges entirely on adopting a minimalist mindset.
And again, we have to stress that minimalism is not an ideology.
Right.
It's not a club you join with a fixed set of beliefs. It is a practical, ongoing commitment to intentionality. Ideologies tell you what to believe. Practices require you to constantly engage and refine your own behavior.
And there's a litmus test, isn't there? The essential question that this intentional minimalism asks for every single item you own or even consider acquiring.
And that question is, does this truly add value to my life or maybe the lives of my community members in a way that justifies the space, the time, and the resources it demands?
And that question requires brutal honesty.
It really does.
Yeah.
Because we are experts at justifying purchases.
Oh, absolutely. We tell ourselves, well, it was on sale, or I might need it someday, or my favorite, it makes me look more successful.
The someday trap is a big one.
It's huge. But if the object doesn't actively contribute to your defined purpose, whether that purpose is creative or relational or purely functional, then the object may be contributing to excess and not abundance.
And that is the key distinction.
The difference between abundance and excess.
Yes, this is the heart of redefining wealth in this entire framework. We really need to dissect that difference.
Let's do it. Where do we start?
Let's start with abundance.
Yeah.
The way this philosophy defines it, abundance is having enough resources, enough margin to be generous without fear.
Okay, generosity without fear.
If you have abundance, you have enough of a resource, whether that's time, money, or physical possessions, that sharing it doesn't leave you feeling personally depleted or, fearing future scarcity.
So true abundance actually gives you freedom.
It gives you freedom to act generously and spontaneously.
Okay, so that's abundance. Now let's look at the counterpoint, excess. This is the one that's so often mistaken for true wealth, especially in Western consumer culture.
It is. Excess is defined as being burdened by what you own. We see the person with 3 extra cars in the driveway or 2 large storage units packed to the brim and these vast collections of things. And our first thought is, wow, they must be so wealthy.
That's the cultural script.
But if those items just sit there unused, requiring constant management, paying for insurance, demanding rent for storage, needing to be cleaned, occasionally maintained.
But then they're not assets.
They are not assets generating value, they are invisible liabilities. They are psychological anchors and financial anchors.
So excess doesn't provide freedom.
It does the opposite. It creates invisible chains because your time and your energy are constantly dedicated to managing the sheer volume of your possessions.
That's a powerful idea. The person with genuine excess is often paralyzed by it.
And they find it difficult to be truly generous because they're too busy managing the volume to even think about letting anything go.
This is the genius of that anecdotal example shared in the source material about the late aunt.
Oh, I love that story.
It wonderfully challenges the visual stereotype of minimalism, the empty, perfectly curated, all-white space.
Yes, the aunt was described as a deeply creative woman who frequently sourced materials from garage sales. And if you looked at her studio, your first impression, you might immediately apply the label hoarder or clutter collector.
Because she had a lot of physical stuff.
A lot of it. But the distinction, the intentionality, was that her possessions were not clutter or excess in that negative sense.
Okay, why not?
They were defined as tools of creation and giving because she used them, actively and deliberately. She wasn't collecting things to look at them or to ensure them.
She was gathering ingredients.
She was gathering the raw ingredients necessary for her chosen purpose, which was making things and sharing those creations with
She
people.
was a prolific maker.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. For a prolific painter, having 1,000 brushes, tubes of every possible pigment you can imagine, and various canvases might look like chaotic excess to an outsider.
It would look like a mess.
But for that painter, that is their operational toolkit. That is their library of resources for creative output. The item serves a defined, continuous purpose.
So the value isn't in the ownership of the item.
The value is in the intentional use and the resulting generosity of the finished work she could then gift to others.
So the same logic applies to someone who is an enthusiastic, intentional baker.
Repeat example.
Having 3 different specialty mixers, 20 types of flour, and 3 full sets of cookie molds isn't excess if you are actively using those items every single week to produce shared meals for your family or your community or your neighbors.
That's the pivot point. If the item is an active instrument of intentional living, if it is used often, shared easily, or central to your defined purpose, it is part of abundance.
But if it's not?
If it is a passive monument to a past aspiration or a fear of scarcity or just a simple impulse by sitting dusty in a closet, it is part of excess.
That ant story provides the perfect corrective to our assumptions. Intentionality trumps aesthetics every single time. It's about function and output, not about visual tidiness.
Exactly.
Now, adopting that functional definition of intentionality, that leads us into a really critical issue, which is drawing boundaries. This brings us to Section 3, the dangers of prescriptive rules and personal discernment.
Yes.
Because once a movement like this gains global traction, the public inevitably tries to boil it down to a simple, easily digestible checklist.
And that's where we see the common pitfalls in so much anti-consumerist literature. It's this reflexive creation of rigid universal rules.
The temptation is just too strong.
It is. The temptation is to publish articles with titles like The 7 Things Minimalists Absolutely Never Own.
And the moment those lists are published,
When movement is intellectually compromised.
it turns critical inquiry into rote memorization. If someone else just hands you a list of things you're not allowed to buy, you stop thinking critically and you start following dogma.
You're just obeying.
And our sources have a perfect, succinct critique of this entire approach.
What's that?
As soon as you make a list of things you're not allowed to buy, you've missed the point entirely.
That's it. That's the whole thing.
Right.
Because the point isn't moral purity. The point is clarity and internal sovereignty.
What do you mean by internal sovereignty?
When you outsource the rules to someone else's list, you outsource your discernment. You're giving away your power to decide for yourself. You no longer have to ask, does this add value to my specifically defined life?
You just ask, is this on the forbidden list?
And that is the intellectual death of intentionality.
So the discussion has to shift. It must shift to framing minimalism not as a quest for moral purity, but as a practice of personal discernment.
Of practice.
And discernment requires active, ongoing engagement and a recognition that what works for your neighbor won't necessarily work for you.
Precisely. What one person defines as wasteful, another may genuinely find useful or even necessary to their particular intentional life.
The judgment often comes from externalizing what we think their life should look like.
Yes, instead of respecting their own defined priorities.
So let's expand on that simple but surprisingly contentious example we touched on before, the purchase of paper towels.
Oh, the paper towel debate. A lightning rod in sustainability discussions.
It really is.
So a dedicated, highly prescriptive minimalist might declare paper towels an environmental and financial waste. Full stop.
Right. They invest in durable, reusable microfiber cloths, they diligently launder them, and they view any kind of disposability as a moral failure.
And that is a perfectly valid, highly intentional choice for their life. They've decided they have the time and the bandwidth for that system, and that's great for them.
But let's consider another person. Let's create a different scenario. Perhaps they run a home-based business involving pet care. Or they are managing the chaotic, high-turnover mess that comes with caring for a relative with complex medical needs.
A very different context.
Completely different context. They might purchase paper towels because they value them as efficient and deliberate tools based on their own highly specific, pressurized personal needs.
For them, the ability to quickly clean up a major, potentially unsanitary mess and immediately dispose of it is a deliberate trade-off they're making.
They're choosing to sacrifice a small amount of money and environmental footprint.
In exchange for what?
In exchange for maintaining their mental bandwidth, for reducing their stress, and for upholding hygiene standards that might be absolutely critical to their caregiving role.
And that why is everything.
Right.
If you purchase the paper towels after a conscious, deliberate assessment that the utility and convenience genuinely allow you to focus your limited time and energy on things you value more,
Like quality time with your family or working on your business.
then that purchase is intentional. It's a valid choice.
But if you just buy them out of habit,
If you buy them simply because you always have, and you don't even think about the purchase, or worse, you feel a pang of guilt every time you rip a sheet off the roll, then it's just excess and unexamined habit.
so the movement just asks us to recognize that there is an inherent, unresolvable tension between personal utility, financial saving, and environmental impact.
And discernment is the act of deciding where your priorities lie on that sliding scale for any given purchase. It's personal.
This emphasis on internal questioning seems to be the core educational benefit of engaging with these philosophies.
Absolutely. The value is not in adopting a fixed set of rules, but in adopting the process of inquiry itself.
The source material emphasizes this brilliantly. It says something like, when you understand the why behind a person's strategy, even if you don't adopt it, you can still learn from it.
Yes, you learn about their motivation, their priority setting, their unique approach to problem solving. It expands your own thinking.
This really elevates the buy nothing concept, doesn't it? It goes from a lifestyle trend to a genuine exercise in philosophical inquiry.
It does. It invites you, the listener, to move beyond just managing your stuff to actually managing your motivations.
And it invites you to examine your own purchasing habits and, maybe more crucially, your deeper psychological motivations.
Because we buy things so often to assuage fears.
What kind of fears?
Well, why do you buy what you buy? Is it a fear of future loss, which causes you to stockpile? Is it a fear of inadequacy, so you buy status symbols?
Understanding those underlying drivers, that's the real work.
That's it, because that allows you to begin the process of gaining mastery over the desire, rather than constantly, exhaustingly managing the inflow of stuff.
And that focus on fear and mastery brings us directly to our next section. Section 4, generosity, community, and the Stoic link.
Yes.
Because once you start examining that fear of loss, you realize just how much that fear limits your capacity for generosity.
And this is where the movement aligns perfectly with a central philosophical theme, one that's rooted deeply in ancient Stoicism, achieving virtue through generosity.
How so? What's the connection to the Stoics?
Well, the Stoics define true virtue, things like justice, temperance, courage, wisdom, as the only reliable good.
Why only those things?
Because these were internal qualities, completely impervious to external forces like loss or damage. No one can take your wisdom away from you.
Okay, so what about possessions?
Possessions, money, and status were all defined as externals, things that are ultimately outside of your complete control. The moment you define your identity or your happiness through those externals, you become fundamentally vulnerable to fortune.
You're a hostage to circumstance.
You are, and acts of generosity are tangible proof that you understand this Stoic dichotomy of control.
So when you share freely,
When you share freely, you are asserting that your security does not reside in the physical object itself, but in your own internal resourcefulness and your resilience.
and the source material noted a really profound personal reflection on this.
Which one is that?
Never regretting being generous, only regretting the hesitation before doing so.
Ah, that's powerful.
That hesitation is the fear, isn't it? It's the attachment to the thing. It's the thought that I might need the specific item again someday.
It's the material object holding the power over you in that moment.
So generosity, by forcing you to release that attachment, acts as a practical mechanism that frees one from fear and attachment to material things.
If you have abundance, that margin we talked about, and you can share it freely, you prove to yourself over and over again that you are sufficient. Your worth isn't tied to what's in your garage.
Every time you give something away freely, whether it's your time or money or a specialty tool you own, you reinforce the belief that you are capable of adapting, of replacing, or of doing without that item if necessary.
The item was the accessory. Your resourcefulness is the true internal asset.
And this brings us to the tangible contemporary application of this philosophy, the buy nothing groups themselves.
Yes, they actively amplify this virtue of generosity by fostering local connection. They provide the infrastructure for what the Stoics would have simply called duty to community.
It provides the practical means to move beyond just philosophical contemplation and actually do something.
Exactly. It connects the person with abundance, say, an excess of harvested zucchini from their garden, or a powerful carpet cleaner they only use twice a year.
With the person who has a specific temporary need, all without the economic friction of commerce.
And we see this happen every single day within these groups. The specific examples are so grounding because they are rooted in everyday mundane needs.
Right. It's not abstract. It's neighbors lending blenders, specific tools, spare drywall, or even sharing complex skills like IT support or recipe advice.
Think about the typical consumer life cycle for a specialized tool. Let's say a tile cutter, or a ladder that's long enough to clean second-story gutters.
Okay.
Everybody on the street owns 100% of the tool that they only use 1% of the time.
And the other 99% of the time, that tool is just sitting in a corner, taking up space, maybe even rusting.
The buy nothing model proposes a much more efficient system. One or two people on the street own the tool, perhaps intentionally purchasing it, knowing they will share it, and the entire community benefits from 100% of its utility over time.
That is just dramatically more efficient, and it creates a much richer social fabric.
But the real gain here, which I think goes beyond just efficiency, is the relational reward.
What do you mean?
You don't just get a blender. You meet the neighbor who owns the blender. You have a real human interaction. You share gratitude, and you build social capital. That connection becomes the emotional reward.
And that connection can effectively replace the fleeting dopamine rush you get from retail therapy.
That is the underlying insight. Community connection can effectively replace habitual consumption.
So when your local social life revolves around sharing, giving, and mutual support,
The compulsion to fill emotional or practical voids with shopping naturally diminishes because the void is already being filled by real connection.
this journey from the environmental urgency of plastic waste to the philosophical virtue of generosity, it feels like a steady climb toward understanding the true meaning of the movement's title.
I think so too.
So let's dive into that. Section 5. The meaning behind get everything.
We have to return to that phrase, buy nothing, get everything. We've sort of established its power as a dual-sided tool. It's a paradox designed to grab your attention, but it's also a genuine description of the non-material yield.
It works because it is a deliberate hyperbole.
It has to be. As the source material observed, if you're too nuanced, you lose people. The phrase grabs your attention, but it's not literal.
It's a necessary simplification to initiate the inquiry. So if we aren't getting physical goods, what are the tangible gains? What is the everything we get?
Well, you summarize the key gains, which collectively represent a profound redefinition of wealth. It's a philosophical transaction, really.
You trade material attachment for a higher form of internal capital.
Exactly.
And we can break it down into 3 non-material but deeply interconnected forms of wealth. The first one is freedom.
Let's analyze freedom first, because I agree it is the most profound gain.
What kind of freedom are we talking about?
This is freedom from the constraints of debt, the constant burden of managing liabilities. It is freedom from the mental and physical clutter that traps you in your own home. And maybe most powerfully, it is freedom from the exhausting, relentless pressure of the wanting mind.
It's the time you gain back by not shopping,
Yes,
the physical space you reclaim from unused possessions, and the mental energy you free up by having fewer commitments tied to maintenance, insurance, and that constant low-level fear of loss.
that is a radical form of freedom in a consumer society.
Okay, so the second gain is community.
Second, you gain community. As we just detailed, the mechanism of sharing and giving actively strengthens your local ties. It moves you out of consumer isolation.
So instead of being dependent on large, faceless corporations to solve your problems via a purchase,
You become reliant on, and just as importantly, valuable to your neighbors. You are moving from being an atomized consumer to being an interconnected citizen,
that sense of belonging, that social security blanket, is an immeasurable form of wealth.
far outweighing the value of any single item you might buy.
And finally, the third game you get is clarity.
This is the ultimate internal reward of intentionality. When you deliberately choose what you keep and what you acquire, and more importantly, you know why you're making those choices, your priorities become crystal clear.
You know what genuinely adds value to your life, and you can ruthlessly discard the rest.
And that clarity allows you to focus your most precious finite resources, your time and your money, on what truly matters to you.
Whether that's experiences or specialized education or just robust relationships.
You stop consuming passively and you start living actively.
So these three elements, freedom, community, and clarity, they collectively represent the fundamental redefinition of wealth.
We move from a scarcity mindset, where wealth is defined by accumulating things you were terrified of losing, to an abundance mindset, where wealth is defined by margin, mastery, and connectivity.
And this leads us to the final philosophical synthesis, the part that connects all the threads of this movement together.
The core lesson here is that this kind of intentionality flips the entire script. Renunciation is not deprivation.
It's a deliberate, empowering release.
When you choose not to buy, you are not denying yourself. You are asserting your mastery over the desire itself.
And the corollary to that, the idea that wealth means resourcefulness, is that abundance does not require accumulation.
You can feel truly abundant and generous with very few things, as long as those few things serve your defined purpose and allow you to serve others.
Ultimately, by letting go of the compulsion to own, you gain mastery over desire, which, as we discussed, is the central pursuit of the Stoic tradition.
The Stoics understood that true happiness comes from controlling your internal reactions, your desires, and your fears, not from controlling external circumstances or acquiring external goods.
So the Buy Nothing movement is, in a way, just Stoicism applied to the modern marketplace.
That's a great way to frame it.
This realization is the true power here. The intentional life, much like the Stoic life, is not about having less stuff.
No, it is about being less enslaved by what one has.
Explain that.
Think about the massive, custom-built kitchen that traps you in a high-interest mortgage you resent every month. Or the complicated collection of things that requires you to pay for climate-controlled storage and constant cataloging.
In that situation, you don't own the object.
The object owns you. It owns you because it dictates how you must spend your time, your money, and your mental bandwidth.
And intentionality forces a reversal of that power dynamic.
You decide if an object is an asset that serves you or a dictator that commands you.
So let's wrap this up with our outro. Final takeaways and a call to musing.
I think we've journeyed from what looks like a rigid, restrictive rule to a flexible, profound philosophy of intentionality, generosity, and community building.
We've really established that the power is not in some list of things you don't buy, but in the critical question you ask yourself before you allow any object to demand your time or your energy.
The intentional minimalist life, defined by this philosophy, is a life of sovereignty.
It is about deeply understanding that your true resources, your time, your attention, your energy, and your community connections are far more valuable than any impulse purchase could ever be. The goal is the maximization of internal freedom.
And that leads us to a final provocative thought for you to carry with you as you move forward from this deep dive.
Okay, let's hear it.
If gaining freedom and clarity is the true definition of getting everything in this equation, then consider this. Think of one significant possession you currently own that you haven't used in the last year, but that you absolutely cannot bring yourself to give away.
Just one item. Identify that one thing that represents the greatest hidden burden over you, forcing you to keep it clean or insured or simply stored.
And then take that crucial next step. Consider what fear that burden represents.
What's the fear behind holding on?
Is it the fear of being seen as less successful if you shed it? Is it the fear of future scarcity that mandates you hold on to things just in case? Because if you can name the fear, you can begin the process of gaining mastery over the desire.
And that is where genuine, lasting abundance finally begins.
That's it.
Food for thought indeed. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.